Hi, I'm excited to share some ERB results from the middle school with you for data over the last couple of years. Before I do that, I just wanted to share a few definitions and some background about the test. So the ERB test is a standardized test, and ultimately student performance is compared to a set of norms, and there's two main norms that we often talk about. One's the national norm, and that includes all the students at the appropriate grade levels in all the schools in the nation. That includes large and small schools, urban, suburban, and rural schools, public, private, and parochial schools. And that norm was developed through a sampling that the folks at the ERB did a number of years ago. The other group is the independent norm group, and that consists of students in independent schools that use the ERB tests. That's really the group that we're interested in. That's our peer group of schools. And that data is ultimately sort of reported or compared against a bell curve, the normal distribution curve that you see in front of you, and reported in terms of stanines. And a stanine is a way of comparing your child's performance with the performance of the norm group. And the stanines are formed by dividing students in the norm group into 9 subgroups on the basis of their test scores. And these subgroups are called stanines and are numbered 1 to 9, lowest to highest. The easiest way to sort of think about the stanines is each stanine is associated with a range of sort of percentile ranks. So a student in stanine 5, so right in the middle of the norm group, has performed about as well as the average student in the norm group. In general, the middle 3 categories, stanines 4, 5, and 6, can be considered to represent average performance for that norm group. Stanines 1, 2, and 3 can be considered to represent below average performance for the norm group, and 7, 8, and 9 can be considered to represent above average performance for the norm group. So what does that really mean? Easiest thing to think about is that the student who scores in the 5th stanine is really, in a sense, performing at grade level and meeting those expectations for the norm group. So they're right where they need to be. Students who perform to the left of the curve, they're performing a little bit below, and students who perform to the right a little bit above. So let's take a look at some of the data. Now these are for language arts scores, and they're aggregate scores for all students for a given year in 5th, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. So there's our scores for 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, and 2012. So if you look at the sort of overall track of those scores, you see that on average, students at LREI perform as well as or slightly better than their student peers in other independent schools. And we can see that because on the left-hand side of the graph, our scores are just below the gray line, which is the normal curve, and on the other side, just slightly above. So this is really good news for us. It means that the kind of intellectual and academic and learning experience that students have every day in the class is preparing them, in one sense, to do well on these more traditional assessments, and on an equally important sense, the kinds of skills and dispositions that the ERB doesn't measure that we think are really important in terms of critical thinking, creativity. We know that we have a program that's oriented towards preparing kids for those kinds of skills, even if they're not tested on this test. So, and the other thing to keep in mind too is the test itself looks really different in terms of the kinds of questions that kids encounter as compared to what they do each day in class. So that means our kids are also really adaptable in taking their knowledge and skills from one context and applying it in a new one. So those are our language arts skills. Let's take a look at the math scores. So the same normal distribution, and here's 2006, 2007, 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, and 2012. So in some sense, the same general picture as we saw for language arts, which scores on the left side of the graph below and scores on the right side above. In some cases, this distribution is even a little bit more dramatic, and that's actually something we're really excited about because we're often asked and have to answer questions about our choice of progressive inquiry-based math program. And what the data really suggest here is our program actually prepares kids really well for more traditional assessments of their math skills. In addition to the skills that the ERB doesn't test at all, which have to do with problem solving, using information in new and novel concepts, and really thinking about mathematics at a really deep and important level. So in looking at both of the scores for language arts and math, we're really excited by this data and have been for a long time, and hope that it confirms for you the sort of depth of sort of vigor and inquiry and demanding intellectual life that happens each day in the middle school, and that really it's not a question of either or, but sort of both and, that our students are able to demonstrate their learning in a variety of ways, from the authentic performance-based kinds of tasks that we do each day, and the more traditional kinds of tasks like a standardized test that we also know we want kids to be prepared for, because further along in their educational career, those tests may play an important role in terms of college admissions. And our goal certainly is to make sure that kids are well prepared to be successful in any intellectual and academic domain that they encounter. So thanks a lot for listening, and we'll talk to you later.